From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie, and good Tuesday to you. This is Coast to Coast AM. Next hour, weather warfare with Jerry Smith. I'm telling you, the weather's all over. A number of tornadoes all over the South today. 15, at least. We'll talk about that with Jerry next hour. Super Tuesday. It was here. It is now gone. Hillary Clinton is still in a battle with Barack Obama. Though the momentum today seemed to go Clinton's way, it's still going to be a long fight for both of them. And John McCain, of course, slowly inching his way away from Mitt Romney, pulling away ever so slowly. This has got all the makings, in my opinion, of another third-party candidate popping in, and probably sooner than later. That's just my guess. Consumers should expect a deep recession triggered by the stealth method by the Federal Reserve to depress the market even when lowering interest rates in an effort to stimulate economic growth. This according to an economic analyst. Dr. Jerome Corsi's been following this incredible story on WorldNet Daily, where some are beginning to predict that the Fed will help push the Dow down from around 12,000 plus to 8,000. Jerry Corsi on the line with us. Jerry, tell me about this one.
Well, George, it's an interesting story from an analyst, Mike Bolser, who really follows the interventions. Looks at the economy as manipulated, where the Federal Reserve is manipulating the Dow downward. And the argument that Mike Bolser makes is that if you follow these repo agreements, repurchase agreements, and very few people know about them, but there's, over $150 billion out in repurchase agreements that the Federal Reserve gives to some 20 select banks to go into the market and make, bets on futures contracts, either up or down, the way the Fed wants it. And Bolser has followed this and tracked it. And as the amount of the money let out in the repo agreements decreases, which it's doing right now, the stock market, the Dow Jones Industrial Averages, track down. And the statistical analysis here is very clear. So as the Federal Reserve behind the scenes manipulates how much money they allow these select 20 banks to reinvest on repurchase agreements, they lend out securities from the Fed, and they say they take them back in 20 days or a few days. And in the meantime, they instruct the banks to go out and buy futures contracts, either up or down, depending upon whether the Fed wants to depress or boost up the stock market. And I wrote the article today in WorldNet Daily, and today the stock market lost 370 points.
Yeah, it was a big drop.
Big drop. And the prediction that Bolser made is that this week, even though, last week we saw the Federal Reserve drop rates 125 basis points, 1.25%. Well, you think that would stimulate the markets. And what Bolser's saying is if you look at the manipulation that's going on in these huge quantities of repurchase agreements, the Fed is kind of like misdirection. They want everybody to think that they're stimulating the economy, but really the Fed is trying to induce a recession in order to, we'd have hyperinflation perhaps. Look at where the price of energy and food are. If the Fed weren't engineering the economy and the Dow downward, the concern is we'd be now in hyperinflation. So what Bolser, I think the genius of what he did was show the manipulation of the Federal Reserve, of the stock market, by these largely unseen and very technical repurchase agreements that's given out to a list of only 20 primary securities banks that are on the approved list. And most Americans, in fact, most professionals in Wall Street know nothing about this repurchase agreement market. But yet I think Bolser's right. It does determine the direction the Dow is going to go.
That's pretty astute on his part. Hey, Jerry, any surprises for you on Super Tuesday?
Well, I think, George, and great question. I think your introduction was exactly right. I think Hillary Clinton, especially if she carries California, is going to go a long way to getting a nomination. And Obama's made a tremendous challenge. It's very impressive how he's come from almost nowhere early on to challenge Hillary Clinton, of course, who was First Lady under Bill Clinton, and everybody knows. But I think if she wins both New York, New Jersey, and now California, Hillary Clinton's well along the way. I think the case is less likely to be settled tonight for John McCain. We see Romney picking up various states. Even Huckabee picked up some. And I've been on the radio today. The conservative talk radio is just a buzz in opposition to John McCain. I mean, Limbaugh was, railing against McCain for, supporting Ted Kennedy with the comprehensive immigration reform, the Kennedy Feingold reforms on campaign funding, McCain not supporting George W. Bush in the tax cuts, McCain possibly even being the vice presidential candidate for John Kerry in 2004. I mean, John McCain, if he does get the nomination, is not going to have the support of the conservative base of the Republican Party. But, George, I continue to think that this coming election, 2008, is the Democrats to lose. I wrote an article that 1.5 million manufacturing jobs have been lost under George W. Bush to globalism, outsourcing under George W. Bush. The 24 states voting today on Super Tuesday, 1 million of those jobs lost to China. The economic downturn we're headed into, I think is going to be very difficult for the Republicans to overcome, no matter who their candidate is. And I think the disaffection in the United States right now with George Bush on any number of issues, spending, the Iraq War, you name it, I think this coming election is the Democrats to lose. They're capable of losing it. But right now, I think if John McCain is the nominee of the Republican Party, the Republican base is just basically going to sit it out. The conservatives do not support John McCain.
See, I see a third party. What do you think?
Well, your comments on that, George, as usual, right on. And, Ron Paul, I think, has raised $20 million and has not finished yet. And Mayor Bloomberg, who's independently wealthy, of course, who knows what he's going to do. I like to remind people, George, before we vote, we've got to go through an entire baseball season. That's 100 and how many games?
162 games.
And a world, playoffs and a World Series. Yep. We're not even into spring training yet. Between now and when we vote, a lot of things can happen. And this election can look very different than it does today. It's not over because this is Super Tuesday. Hillary may have an advantage. Obama's not done. And John McCain may be gaining. But the Republican Party, especially with the conservative base, is still in disarray.
I like your insight, Jerry. Thanks for the updates, and we're going to watch the stock market, my friend.
Always a great pleasure and honor to be with you. Thank you, George.
Jerry Corsi, his most recent book, The Late Great USA. Actor Barry Morse, who played a detective pursuing the wrongly accused Dr. Richard Kimball in the 1960s television series The Fugitive, has died. He was 89 years old. Born in London in 1918, Morris trained at London's Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts and appeared in British repertory and West End theaters before going to Canada in 1951. He loved the part he played of Lieutenant Philip Gerard on The Fugitive. The series ran for 120 episodes over 4 seasons. Restraining order against the man who's been at Britney Spears' side during her downward spiral alleges that he drugged her, took over her finances, and controlled the paparazzi like a general. The order was against Sam Lufty, was based on a lengthy declaration from Spears' mother, Lynn, who says that Spears met the 33-year-old in October of 2007, and essentially, he moved into Britney's home and took control of her life. The power of prayer is all it takes to relax with a drink at a newly opened Croatian cafe. Customers at the Jedro coffee shop in Zagreb are asked to say a certain number of prayers in return for their drinks. The most expensive beverage is Coca-Cola, which costs 5 Hail Marys. A cappuccino costs 4 Our Fathers. NASA Space Shuttle Atlantis ready for a Thursday space shot. Atlantis slated to launch the 7-astronaut crew at 2:45 p.m. Eastern Time. A British firm claims to have designed a hypersonic passenger plane that could one day fly between Europe and Australia in less than 5 hours. Unfortunately, they say it'll take 25 years to perfect. Sci-Fi coming up with an incredible new series, UFO Hunters. We're going to talk with two of the principals of that new show in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. You know, we cover incredible UFO stories here on this program, and now the Sci-Fi Television Network, they're about ready to embark on something fascinating as well. I want to introduce you to a couple of principals of a brand new television program called UFO Hunters. You know, Sci-Fi has Ghost Hunters. Now we've got UFO Hunters. Oliver von Kaminsky is the founder of the New York Strange Phenomena Investigators up there in New York, of course, a scientific research group dedicated to the investigation of UFO sightings, UFO abduction reports, and extraordinary occurrences. Here's Oliver. Hey, Oliver, how are you?
Hello, George. How are you? An honor
Good.
to be here.
My pleasure. And Ted Davis, been interested in UFOs for as long as he can remember, and he is also a part of the Sci-Fi's new UFO Hunters. Ted has been a friend of Bud Hopkins and the Intruders Foundation for a number of years. In 2006, he and Oliver branched out, forming their own research group, the one I just mentioned. Hey, Ted Davis, how are you?
I'm doing great, George. Thanks for having me.
Good. Both of you, tell me a little bit about the TV show. Oliver, go ahead, start.
Well, the TV show is basically a franchise of the Hunters, Sci-Fi Hunters series, and they're looking to do something similar as they are doing with Ghost Hunters with UFOs. Basically looking to chase down and investigate UFOs from a scientific perspective.
And Ted, what will the role be for you, for Oliver?
Well, we are the lead investigators. We're the founders of NISPY, and so we are coordinating the investigations and organizing the team and directing it out into the field to do the investigations.
What kind of cases are you going to investigate, Ted?
We're going to cover everything within the realm of UFOs. So it's going to be a little bit of abductions, a little bit of daytime sightings, nighttime sightings, you name it. We'd love to go out to some hot spots and set up cameras and see if we can catch activity, as well as going into reported sightings after the fact and trying to piece it together and see if we can find any hard evidence.
Are you going to be able to go all over the country, Oliver?
Well, we're hoping we can. At this point, our show is just a pilot, and we're hoping that we'll be ordered into a series or at least a few more shows. But I guess our intentions are to go after the cases that have the greatest amount of evidence, those that have video footage, those that have a lot of photographs, multiple witnesses, possible physical evidence cases. And that's kind of how we opened up with our show that is airing tomorrow night.
All right. What time will it be on?
It will be on the Sci-Fi Network at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 Central.
Are you happy with the first show?
Yeah, we were very, very happy with the show. I have to say I can't give enough accolades to Pilgrim Films and Television. They're the same people that do Ghost Hunters. They were very, very patient and listened to us and took the time to understand what we were telling them, why UFO hunting is a lot different than ghost hunting. Whereas with ghosts, you would more or less would set up a camera in a place that is haunted, and you would investigate a case hoping to get something on camera. With UFO cases, you're more or less going to investigate a case after the fact, and you're collecting evidence as one would in a criminal investigation, finding small pieces of evidence, talking to witnesses, gathering video, putting the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together to prove the case.
And you know, after you begin to talk to some of these witnesses, people who are not in the know in terms of UFO research, they've got to come away from these interviews shaking their head going, you know, these people are normal people. They're not liars. They're not trying to gain anything. They're telling us what they really saw. It's got to be pretty remarkable for the so-called skeptics, don't you think?
Well, as long as you have an open mind and you're not a true believer that things don't exist, then yeah, Ted and I are constantly floored by the things that we see out there that so many people repeat the exact same stories that describe the exact same patterns of behaviors and so forth.
Hey, do you two have any special or favorite UFO case?
Well, I think we'd probably have to say one of the cases that's on the pilot episode. which is an abduction case rolled into the Carteret UFO sightings back from 2001. We went and looked into that case again because we uncovered some new witnesses, one of which was John Bredovan, who reported that he had been abducted into an object in and around that case. So it was very interesting, and we spent a lot of time in the pilot episode looking into it.
Is this a 1 hour show?
It is a 1 hour show, and there's actually 2 separate episodes in that 1 hour show.
And they move very quickly, don't they, Oliver?
They sure do. There's a lot of evidence in the case that the production company filmed with us, and, they have their limitations. They have to keep it entertaining. And, quite frankly, there's a lot of evidence that we gave them that got caught on the editing room floor, which we would love at some point for them to release. But at this point, the show itself, we were very, very happy with the final product.
Was there much talk at all, you two, about this most recent case in Texas?
Yeah, we would love to get a chance to investigate that as well. We've been pretty busy trying to get this show off the ground and advise people about it as well, but that would be one of our first avenues of pursuit if we got the nod from Sci-Fi to go out and investigate it.
We got to get you up there on the West Coast. You got to go up to Washington to Jim Gilliland's place, where apparently at willy-nilly he'll go outside and see UFOs all over the place. I'm going to go up sometime this year as well.
Well, those are actually cases that we'd also love to track down. Cases where there's photographic evidence, almost weekly or monthly. People seem to always capture things on their cameras. Nowadays people have so many cameras, and there's cameras on their cell phones, and people always have the ability to take photos, or almost always. So that's why you're getting more and more visual reports these days. If you can take a case where they're always repeating these same sightings in the same locations, that would be a prime opportunity to actually do hunting as opposed to collecting the data that has occurred.
Grant and Jason from Ghost Hunters, their background is in plumbing. You're UFO hunters. What's your background?
Well, my background is more in the mental health professionals field. I have a master's in psychology and a master's in social work. So pretty rounded experience in the mental health field.
How about you, Oliver?
I'm an engineer by education and technical engineering by profession as well. I come from things at a very scientific perspective. I like to see a lot of the details and the data behind what people say they've seen.
Are you two going to attempt to get some government whistleblowers eventually, if this series continues to spill their guts?
It's actually kind of funny that you ask. Our opening show with the John Bredovan case, the Carteret case, there was actually some whistleblowing as far as governmental acknowledgement goes in that show. Originally, that was a huge sighting that occurred in Carteret, New Jersey in 2001. It was witnessed by many, many people. And at the time, the FAA and all the local airports and military installations in the area, high-traffic area near Newark Airport, had reported nothing unusual, nothing strange, nothing on the radar. Yet we were able to uncover with time through Dennis Anderson, one of our team members, his efforts, together with NIDS, we were able to uncover actual radar evidence that was leaked out. So,
are you believers?
In that particular report that we gathered, yes.
And how about overall in general, Ted?
I wouldn't say believers. We're driven by the evidence, and the evidence has compelled us to believe that there's something more than just the mundane out there. We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't feel there was something more going on than hoaxes and misidentifications and that sort of thing.
Well, and I'm glad the Sci-Fi Network's devoting some time to this because, we need disclosure and we need more and more coverage of these cases, not only across this country but worldwide as well. And maybe one day we'll all really get the answers we've all been trying to find. Yeah,
we have been doing this voluntarily for years and years, and for the past 10 years we've been working with the great Bud Hopkins and his research group, And it's just been a passion that we've pursued. We don't get paid for this. We've basically just did it out of our own interest, and the intention of getting the science out there to be more accepted by mainstream science.
Absolutely. Well, good luck to both of you. The program's on the Sci-Fi Television Network on Wednesday. Just consult your local directory there and get the specific time, and have a watch. Should be a great program. I'll be back in a moment with open lines. Here are the numbers. West of the Rockies, 800-618-8255. East of the Rockies, 800-825-5033. First-time caller line is 818-501-4721. And the wild card line is 818-501-4109. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Well, starting Wednesday, running through Sunday, a free Streamlink week for you, so take advantage of it. Just go up to the coasttocoastam.com website and read all about it. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie. Open lines for you for this hour. Then we talk about weather warfare. Let's go to our international line. Where are you calling from? Hi there.
Hi, George. It's me from Sudbury.
Hey, me? Is that your real name, me?
It's me, yeah. I've been trying to...
You may be the only one who finally says, is it me? And you're right.
Whenever people call in, they go, is it me? Is it me?
Exactly.
I hear that, and I just can't believe it. And I just get a big chuckle each and every time, because that's my name, M-I-E.
That's funny.
You have a great night, George.
That's it?
Yep. I said to your producer, I'll make it quick.
Okay, great. Let's go next to our wild card line. You're on the air with us. Hello there.
Hi, this is Rich from Phoenix. I just got a crazy question for you here.
Okay, Rich.
About the UFO Hunters program. It sounds like there's another one, almost exact same name, but on another channel. I don't want to mention the other channel. I'm just curious if it's the same one, or are they the two networks connected with each other?
No, they're two different. I think there's a similar one on the History Channel.
Yeah, that's correct, and it's very good. That's what I was asking about, but it sounds like it's got the same name.
I love these programs, don't you?
I sure do, and I'm glad when you come on them.
Yeah, I pop on every once in a while. I was on Larry King's. I've been on the one on the History Channel. So if these folks invite me on as a guest, I'll come on too.
Oh, cool. Well, keep up the good work, and I'll listen off there.
Okay, sure thing. Let's move next to our West of the Rockies line. You're on the air with us. Hello there.
Oh, this is Scott. Hi, George.
Hey, Scott, you are, if I recall, in Sacramento.
Sacramento, you're right.
Well, what a memory, huh?
Yeah, you got a good memory. Anyway, two subjects. First, I wanted to really commend you on your subject matter. I really like the stuff you do for, cryptozoology and UFO talk. I mean, those are my two favorite subjects. I'm just glued to the radio. And the other thing is, the other night Condor was on, and I thought he was just great. He's very believable. Everything he says, he either thinks he can back it up, or he thinks that his sources are really good, and some of them, I guess, he's verified. So he's really great to listen to. And but no one asked him about what he thought of John Lear's theory. John Lear has this theory that I think you've heard it, and Art has played it, where apparently he thinks there's some sort of machine on the moon that
stores souls
and feeds them into the humans when they're born or something. And it sounds so outlandish, and I wondered if you had talked to him about it, or somebody would otherwise when he comes back on next time, because I just wondered what his theory is, because Condor seems like he's really dialed in, and I think he's really attuned to things. So if there was something like that, he would know about it. And my other subject is, I thought we were going to get more out of that Chicago O'Hare issue. I thought there was supposed to be some film coming, or Dan Aykroyd had some stuff that he was going to show that he had bought or something. And I was just wondering, what's the latest on that? Are we going to get some more?
Aykroyd and David Sarita have put it together on a DVD program. It's out there in the public, but really all it shows is the donut hole through the clouds.
Where it went.
Yep. It just something bust through there.
All right.
Who knows what it was?
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And then next time maybe Condor could field that question about John Lear's theories, because it sounds really outlandish to me. And if there's anything to it, I think Condor would know, don't you?
Okay. Yeah, he just might, Scott. He was a pretty interesting guy. Speaking of birds, When I was in St. Louis, my show was the Nighthawk show, but it wasn't a bird. It was based on a plane. But I saw land next to me today, a hawk. This thing was huge. But I got to tell you, it is one of the prettiest birds I've ever seen. I mean, this thing had so much elegance to it and splendor. It was just incredible. But he just popped up, sat on a pole, looked around a little bit, and off he went. Let's go back to the phones. We'll go to our East of the Rockies line. Hi there. Hello. Are you there?
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, yeah, I want to know if George ever had ghost hunters on.
George has had ghost hunters on. Jason and Scott. And Grant and Jason.
Jason and Grant, yeah.
Why, did you like the show?
Yeah, I must have missed that show. I didn't know if they...
it was a long time ago. Probably 2 years ago.
Oh, was that long ago? Do you think they'd ever have him on again? I think it'd make a good show.
Well, he might. What do you think? Should we tell George about it?
Yeah, I'd like to hear that show. I followed the TV show, and I'd like to hear it on the radio.
All right. Do you listen to Coast to Coast a lot?
I try to a couple times a week.
What do you think, George? Just between you and me.
I like George.
Do you? Well, let's not tell him, though, you know? All right, thanks. Appreciate it. Okay, let's go to our first-time caller line. You're on the air. Hi there.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, I'm calling from Houston. My name is Ali.
Hello, Ali. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, George, did they ever find out about the date of 2012? What is supposed to happen?
Oh, Ali, there are so many different theories about 2012. I mean, they run the gamut from celestial events to enlightenment events to nothing to some earth change, some shattering earth change, a polar shift, an asteroid hitting us. There's so many theories out there. Nobody really knows for sure. We've all got our thoughts, but nobody knows for sure.
Yeah, but also I was talking to one of my friends, and he read some data from back from 1986, 87, and he said something about the calendar. I don't know if you ever heard about this, about the Mayan calendar 2012. There was supposed to be some sun
solar flares.
No, not solar flares, but said they're supposed to go black like 2 or 3 days.
Really? No, I haven't heard that one, Ollie.
Yes, but this guy, he's Austrian, you know, and he's an engineer, you know, and he speaks pretty good English, and he come in and out, and he comes in a chemical plant engineer.
Okay, well, send me an email on him, Ollie, if you can. We'll track him down. Like I said, there's so many theories out there. Next up, Wildcard Line, you're on the air with us. Hello there. Good morning.
Good morning, George. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
I've been listening to your show for a couple of years, but the one thing I really wanted to compliment you on, I know a lot of people compliment you, but I'd like to say you're one of the very few talk show hosts that actually let their guests finish a sentence without interrupting them, and it's really refreshing to listen to somebody actually give their guests time to speak.
I got an email a couple days ago from someone who said, "Quit interrupting your guests." And I'm reading this thing going, no, I think he sent it to the wrong person. I don't know who he wants to send it to, but it's not me.
Maybe Alan Combs. He's good at interrupting it. One thing I wanted to bring up, and I don't want to sound like a conspiracy nut or anything, but you were talking a while back about some kind of a doomsday order that the Bush administration could use in case of a time of something drastic happening.
Yeah, Corsi and Sean David Morton have been talking about that, two of our guests.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, but I was just thinking that I'm going to take it one step further, and I truly believe that over the next year, even though the election's going on, and it's a long way to November, and I still believe that if he wanted to take power in the United States, he could very well easily do it by, let's say, the stock market collapses and we have a real something like that. It wouldn't be any, I don't think he wouldn't hesitate a bit for him and Cheney to just come up with that executive order and say, this is the time I'm going to have to take control of the country,
Well, I got to tell you, Bob, the executive order's been signed, and if there is any kind of a calamity at all, I mean, it is so wide-ranging in terms of the events that would trigger the ability to do that. Right. Just about anything could. I mean, an epidemic of some disease, you name it.
Right.
Any person at this point now who is a standing president could keep himself in office for the foreseeable future if he or she so elects to do that. That's kind of scary.
Yeah. Well, I hope that doesn't happen, and I hope our next president will defend the Constitution instead of trying to tear the Constitution apart.
Well,
so thank you, George. Right. And
thanks,
I really...
Bob. Okay, and then we cut you off right at the end. How about that? West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hi there.
Hello, George. Thank you so much for your programs. They're so interesting. I never was a late-night person until the last couple of years when I started listening to you.
So we've changed your life pattern, huh?
You have. It's kind of tough, but anyway. And I hate it when I fall asleep when I'm really trying to listen. But anyway, I'm calling because of all of the programs, of course, that you have on about UFOs. But sometime last year, you had someone on from SETI. And it just kind of made me feel schizophrenic because here we are having all of these sightings and everyone, now they've got the UFO hunters. Why hasn't SETI reported anything? Or have they? Did I miss something?
No. You're probably talking about Seth Shostak, who comes on the program. He's the spokesperson for SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. That organization, and I think, they're doing a great job. It's kind of fun to think of beaming signals into space and listening for signals, but they do not believe that we have been visited by beings from outer space. They believe that they're out there, that's why they're listening, but they don't say that they've come here. They just don't believe it. And Seth, who's an astronomer and a pretty good one, just feels, along with other members of the organization, that the ETs have just never been here.
But what are they doing about the evidence that these gentlemen you were talking to tonight are talking about?
Well, the evidence is abound. I mean, unfortunately, we've got little tiny pieces of what people would say, show me the hard evidence, little trinkets of metal and things like that. But we need to see, and we may very well have somewhere in Area 51, for example, but we need to get the hard evidence, the craft. And the public needs to see this, I think, in order for this entire planet to wake up again. I believe we've been visited. I think we've been genetically altered myself. I think we were helped. I believe in God, but I think whoever came here, kind of jump-started us a little bit.
Well, I just thought it was funny that SETI never picked anything up. But
no, not yet.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
You are very welcome. Let's go next to East of the Rockies. You're on the air. Hi there.
Hello, George. How you doing tonight?
Good.
This is Rick from Galveston, Texas.
Hey, Rick. How are you? I was just in Austin about a week or so ago.
Oh, and I heard you had a fall in the mud hole.
Oh, man. I went down into this hole, and apparently somebody's got it on videotape, and they're trying to extort me now, or they're going to put it on YouTube.
I'm the bicycle evangelist guy that I talked to you before.
Yeah.
But the reason I was calling is, did you see I saw here on the Channel 13 here in Houston News that they showed that Iran had launched a missile out of Iran into outer space today.
They did that actually yesterday. It's called the OMID. It's the Omid rocket. They have now become the 11th nation in the world to be able to launch something into space. So they're coming along pretty quickly.
Yeah, and it's kind of strange, it's not really strange, with them trying to. They say they're not trying to build nuclear weapons, but now they're getting their rocket technology and So we don't know where it's going, but just only God, well, like you say, there's a higher power, but He knows. But I don't know. It's just I guess it's hard to say where it's going to end up. But that's all right, though. But they're building something, and so I guess we're just going to have to just hope that this new administration that comes in, they'll be able to deal with it in a political manner that.
My guess, Ricky, my guess is that it's going to be dealt with before the election even occurs.
Okay.
One way or another.
Well, President Bush said, they're not going to have nuclear weapons on my watch, and so we're hoping, we just hope nothing bad happens, but. So. Oh, and I haven't seen no more demons in a while.
Well, good. You've been cleansed.
Well, you said you hoped there was nothing in my house because of that when that girl was here. No, but because I got a calling which I can pretty much defend myself from them, and so I know that with all the Galveston is a bad place, actually, for demons and stuff because of all the drugs that went on here in Galveston for quite a while. But it's getting better here now. It's getting a lot better. I see where it's getting a lot more better, and the drugs isn't as bad as in Galveston as it used to be, so it's getting a lot better.
So the demons are moving on, Ricky.
Well, when I look at it, Satan knows his time is drawing to a near end, and he's putting as many as he can on. We don't know what's really happening. I just know that, hey, you know what? We have to stay in faith and keep fighting and believing that, hey, good's going to win. That's it. Good's going to win.
Well, I agree with you. Good is going to win eventually, but it's going to be a battle. And believe me, before someone like Satan throws in the towel, he's going to fight it for all he can. Let's go to our wild card line. It's your turn. Hi there.
Hi, George. This is Greg from Columbia, Missouri.
Hey, Greg. How are you?
Fine. I just had a little request. I know it's a little a ways from now, but on April 3rd, it'd be the anniversary of the late Terrence McKenna, and I was kind of hoping that you would maybe have his brother Dennis on or play an older show of his. I thought that would be a nice kind of tribute to him. And also with all of the UFO talk, I thought that he brought a really unique perspective to the whole UFO phenomenon that really doesn't get addressed much. And if he could maybe apply that to some of your show, I think that would be great. And that's pretty much it.
Okay, April 3rd. It's coming up.
Yeah, thanks.
Coming up. Okay, I'll talk with the producers about that. First-time caller line. You're on the air with us. Hi there.
Hi, George. My name is Jose. I'm calling from Cleveland.
Jose. Yes, sir.
I get a question, though. How or what can produce a space-time disturbance?
What could produce it? If it can be produced, it could be just anything. Electrical charges. Maybe there's been a machine that's been created that can create that kind of a portal, some kind of electromagnetic pulse. I really don't know. I don't know if we've got the ability to do it or not. Why do you ask? That's an interesting question.
No, it's because it's one of those things. I was driving like 2 years ago, and it feels like a shock wave. Just pretty much everything kind of stops, but you feel it. And I was reading about it on the internet, and I couldn't find anything kind of defining it. But I was thinking, what can produce something like that? Just kind of gonna stop in time, just for one moment.
We just had a guest on who may have gone through the Bermuda Triangle where mist enveloped him. I think it was an electrostatic charged cloud, for example. That has a lot to do with it, and how it creates these portals. That's anybody's guess, Jose. It really is. Hey, if you need to email me, just send it my way. That's George at coasttocoastam.com. Tornadoes ripping across 4 southern states, tearing through homes, ripping the roof off a shopping mall. blowing apart warehouses. Another very rare, violent winter storm. It killed at least 15 people, injured dozens more. Weather manipulation. In a moment, Jerry Smith joins us on Coast to Coast AM. Well, Jerry Smith is an overnight sensation. It's been in the making for 4 decades now. His professional career has been as a writer, lecturer, editor, and it began with his very first writing back, Sail, in 1969. His newest book is Weather Warfare, the Military's Plan to Draft Mother Nature. It is a follow-up to his 1998 bestseller, HARP, the Ultimate Weapon of the Conspiracy. In the 1990s, Jerry was the executive director of the National UFO Museum in Reno, Nevada, while editing the organization's quarterly journal, Notes from the Hangar, and Jim's political metaphysical magazine, Dharma Combat. He's our special guest tonight on Coast to Coast, Jerry E. Smith. Hey, Jerry, how are you?
I'm good. I'm delighted to be with you.
Likewise. But you have a pretty varied background. Tell me a little bit about your UFO background.
Oh, okay. I maturated in science fiction fandom. I got started on it at age 8, reading Robert A. Heinlein's "Have Spacesuit Will Travel," and I was a member of the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society from 1966, more or less to present, because the bylaws say once you're a member, even death does not release you. My best friend from high school to his untimely death in 1999 was Jim Keith. Jim and I did a number of projects together, and he got me into science fiction fandom in '66, and he had met Adamski, and he had a real keen interest in UFOs, and he got me to read a couple of books like Timothy Good's Above Top Secret. Mm-hmm. Which is, a spectacular book. And I stumbled into a cache of Nazi disc aircraft books, the Metternich, Samizdat books, and so forth. And I had Jim and I had a mutual friend who everybody called Crazy Larry, who was convinced he could build one of those things if he could just get enough of the plans. So I started searching for the plans, thinking, well, there had to be a UFO museum out there somewhere, and there wasn't. So being one of those people who believe in if you want something done right, do it yourself, I started a UFO museum. That we got up and running, sort of. We never really got the museum proper open, but we got an organizing office and a quarterly journal and a little bit of a gift shop. Okay. And that got us funding for a few years, but it eventually the Reaganomics trickle down economy took us out.
Well, that happens, Jerry. That happens. But, you've got some great credentials leading us into, of course, your first book, as I mentioned, HARP, the Ultimate Weapon of the Conspiracy. Did you expect it to be such a hot seller?
Not really. No, I was very much surprised by it. What had happened was Nick Begich and Gene Manning wrote Angels Don't Play This Harp, and, of course, you've had Nick on many times. And I thought Nick and Gene had done a great job on the what, where, when, how of HARP, but they'd left out who and why. Mm-hmm. And one of Jim Keith's publishers, Ron Bonds at INET, felt the same way. And Ron contacted Jim Keith, basically called him up one day and said, hey, HARP is the hottest thing on the Internet right now. Can you write me a book on the subject? And Jim said, well, actually, I got 4 contracts going. I'm booked up, but I got a friend. And so Jim put me in touch with Ron Bonds, and Ron really wanted a conspiracy theory book. So what I did, and I had been researching mind control since 1976 to when Ron and I talked in 1996. So I had a lot of background in this, a lot of stuff I wanted to get out, and this became the perfect springboard to bring that out. And curiously enough, Ron read the first draft and hated it and canceled the project. And I ended up sitting on the manuscript for a year, and then I remembered David Hector Childress at Adventures Unlimited Press. And it turned out David was looking for a book on HARP, and he snatched it. I called him one afternoon, and he cut me a check that day.
And there you go.
And there you go. For the next 5 years or so, it was the second or third bestseller for AUP. It's now been out for. I realized that in another couple of days will be 10 years.
10 years, Joe.
Since the day I sent the manuscript off to David.
Can you believe how fast time goes by?
It's amazing.
It really is. We have talked on this program about weather manipulation for years now, and I'm so glad that we've got you on today to talk about this area, which is going to include chemtrails and just about everything else. Give us a little bit of the background of weather and weather warfare.
Cool. This book is really a follow-up on my HARP book, which was HARP, The Ultimate Weapon of the Conspiracy. And after that book came out, Nick and I traded notes. And Nick got real involved in the mind control side of things. So I decided to take the weather control side of things. And I spent the next 7 years researching this thing, and it took me 2 years to write. And at one point, about 4 years ago, I ran into a quote, and that quote set the keel, if you will. When I read that quote, I realized that this is the springboard. This is the focus point, and this is from U.S. Secretary of State's U.S. Secretary of Defense, William S. Cohen. And Cohen was speaking in his official capacity as the head of the DoD, Department of Defense, at a conference on terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, and U.S. strategy in 1997. So this can be taken, since he was speaking in his official capacity as the Secretary of Defense, you can take this as an official understanding of the United States government. And so in 1997, the United States government believed, and I quote, "Others are engaging even in an eco type of terrorism, whereby they can alter the climate, set off earthquakes, volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves. It's real, and that's the reason why we have to intensify our efforts." So my book, Weather Warfare, The Military's Plan to Draft Mother Nature, is a 400-page examination of whether or not that's a true statement.
Now, here's the question. How come the mainstream media, Jerry, didn't pick up on that quote?
It's a hard thing, and it's a curious thing, and I've always wanted to discuss this quote with somebody, in that it came up in the Q&A section of this keynote address, and he starts off, and the quote is quite. I admit it's taken somewhat out of context, because the context is somebody asked him a question, and he starts telling them about how there are false reports out there that are being used to stampede governments and scare people. And he starts listing these false reports. And as he's listing the false reports, he drifts into what I believe are true reports. And then he ends with that it's real. But he doesn't exactly say what it is. So I kind of get the feeling, in my reading of this, that he went from telling about false reports to telling about true reports, and forgot what he was talking about, actually forgot what he was really answering the question to, and sort of lets the cat out of the bag and tells the real thing when he hadn't meant to. Now, that's the way I read that quote. But whatever the quote is, whatever what's going on there, the media, I mean, it's just some conference, just another conference, and the media just ignored it. It has turned up all over the internet, which I found rather fascinating.
Well, we know the Chinese manipulate weather. We know the Russians do for sure. One can only assume we do on a regular basis.
Oh, indeed. We the big reason why we don't hear about us in the U.S. media is because there has been a virtual blackout on the U.S. media talking about what the U.S. government is doing since the U.S. government got caught with its fingers in the cookie jar in Vietnam. Project Popeye was an attempt to extend the monsoon season in Southeast Asia, and using cloud seeding over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, they hoped to turn the Viet Cong resupply route into a hopeless quagmire of mud. This went on for about 8 years during the Vietnam War. When that came out, Congress investigated. The investigation was led by Senator Claiborne Pell, Democrat, Rhode Island. And initially, You know, it came out in 71 in Jack Anderson's column. Claiborne Pell began his investigation in 72, and then Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird lied to Pell, lied to his committee, and said, no, we're not doing that. That's just nonsense. 2 years later, a private letter from Laird got leaked to the press in which he admitted that it was real and was ongoing, at which point Pell started up the investigation again, but by this time Laird had left DOD and was now working as a lawyer for Richard Nixon, who was fighting for his political life in the aftermath of Watergate.
Okay.
And so Pell couldn't get Laird to come back on the stand, but he did get the Pentagon to agree to secret closed-door sessions. And there they admitted that Operation Popeye was real, had been ongoing for 8 years, that they had done cloud seeding over 4 countries, North and South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, the latter two in violation of international law because they were neutral countries. They had expended 47,000 units of cloud seeding material at a cost of about $21.6 million. This amazed Pell, and he demanded to know what else the DOD were doing. And they surprised him with a laundry list of crazy, insane, unthinkable things they were doing, including such things as developing the technology to thin out the ozone layer over an enemy populace so as to sicken the enemy populace through increased exposure to solar radiation. This led Pell to lead the charge to create an international treaty banning this. And that international treaty was introduced into the UN by the U.S. and USSR jointly and was signed into international law in 1978. And that treaty is called the Convention on the Prohibition of Military or Any Other Hostile Use of Environmental Modification Techniques, also called the NMOD Convention. NMOD is a curious buzz term. If you try to do a Google on the term NMOD, it will only come up in reference to this treaty. The U.S. has realized that that's a word they can't say, and you'll never find the U.S. government saying this. Now, curiously, before we signed the NMOD treaty, Uncle Sam was spending between $40 and $140 million a year on developing NMOD technology and had over 700 degreed scientists working on the project. After we signed the treaty, the U.S. federal allocations went to zero, and those jobs vanished. Well, now, Uncle Sam didn't say, "Oh, can't do that anymore." No, the whole thing went not exactly black. It went to civilian contractors.
They farmed it out, and they funded it. Okay.
You may remember a couple of years ago, you had a scientist from Weather Modification Incorporated of Fargo, North Dakota on your show. And that scientist outed himself as having been one of the senior scientists on Operation Popeye.
Okay.
That's civilian contractor, just like we're hearing about Halliburton and kill, burn, and loot in Iraq these days.
By going to private companies, what did they avoid that way?
Well, they avoided scrutiny. It's off the books. It's off the budget. But private contractors can do whatever they want, and they don't have to tell Congress what they're doing.
They just let the contracts out, right?
Exactly. And the way Uncle Sam has been doing this is that it's the private contractors, particularly Weather Modification Incorporated, have been dealing at lower levels, at state and county, municipality levels, and business to business levels. So it doesn't make national news. It doesn't turn up in congressional hearings because it's nowhere near Washington. It's all being done in Kansas and Oklahoma and Nevada.
Do you see anything wrong with manipulating the weather for war purposes, Jerry? I mean, you do want to win.
Boy, that's such a great question. The problem I see is not the military aspect; it's the unintended consequences. The never saw that coming side of things that get us. We have a situation where science pretends it knows a whole lot more than it really does. And it's constantly being blindsided by unexpected, unintended consequences.
Well, you're right about that. We've experimented on things like that, too, on this program, where we take care of the goal, but the consequences are unexpected.
Right. In HARP, the ultimate weapon of the conspiracy, I use as an example one of the great inventions of human history, and one that no American could imagine living without, is indoor plumbing. And yet, when indoor plumbing was originally invented a couple of thousand years ago, they didn't understand lead poisoning, and they made indoor plumbing out of lead pipes. And the Roman intelligentsia went mad from lead poisoning because it was an unexpected, unrecognized consequence to a new technology. And today we have tens of thousands of new technologies being introduced every year, and we have no idea what the long-term consequences of most of these things are going to be.
Are you a believer that the control of weather truly is possible?
Oh, it's now a matter of belief. I mean, I don't believe if I let go of an apple, it's going to hit the ground. I know it's going to hit the ground, leastwise if I'm standing on the planet Earth. So there's the fact that weather can be modified is a scientific given at this point. Indeed, the American Meteorological Society grudgingly admits that the last 40 years of data shows them conclusively that cloud seeding can produce an effect, at least in a localized short-term scenario.
Cloud seeding can in a short-term scenario. But once again, how do we know it can't get blown out of proportion?
Well, we don't. And indeed, throughout the most people have no clue that the technology, the history of making artificial rain is 130 years. That the first patent granted by the United States Patent Office was granted in 1880 for making artificial rain. And throughout the history of artificial rainmaking, there have been problems with making too much rain. A classic example of that was 1919. The city of San Diego had been experiencing a drought for several years and was really hurting from it. Hired a rainmaker named Hatfield. Hatfield came in, and within 48 hours, after setting up his equipment, it went from clear skies to torrential rains. So much so that creeks overflowed their banks, several dams broke, and several people were killed. The city refused to pay him and ran him out of town on a rail. Now we have a situation like that in China right this very moment. China is experiencing the worst snowstorm in 20 years. Now, we also know that China has the largest and most aggressive weather modification program on the planet. There are the Chinese have repeatedly stated, and including as recently as last Thursday, there was a press conference at the Olympic Village in Beijing, where the head of the the Weather Modification Bureau promised that there would be no rain on opening day of the Olympics, and explained how she was going to do that. And among the things that came out is that they had 37,000 people working on weather management in China, and have had this going on for more than a decade. And when I heard about that snowstorm, my first thought was the Hatfield case.
The manipulating of the weather has been going on for a long time. Native American shamans, of course, would have their rain dances. What is so different from what they wanted, and that was to prevent a drought, from what modern science is doing? Think about that, Jerry. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And our special guest tonight, Jerry Smith, Weather Warfare. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Jerry, right before the break, I was going to ask you, Native American shamans had their rain dances. They wanted to prevent droughts. They needed it to rain. How different is that from creating our own weather?
Well, it's really not a matter of intent, but a matter of technique. And it's not just Native Americans. If you go to Wikipedia and look at the rain dance page, you'll see there's a photo of Ethiopians doing a rain dance a couple of years ago. So that the belief in using magic or invoking the gods to bring about atmospheric conditions is still ongoing on this planet today. but there's a considerable difference in using scientific application of scientific knowledge to of how systems work versus simply begging the gods to come in on your side.
Well, a lot of times, too, they say the reason why these dances work is because they don't stop raining, they don't stop dancing until it rains.
Well, that was one of the old arguments about the rainmakers, particularly the 1890s. A number of times the rainmaker would put up that it would rain within the next week, or you wouldn't have to pay him. And a number of newspaper reporters simply said, "Well, the guy's simply betting his time versus your $500 that it'll rain before the week's out."
Let's talk about cloud seeding for a moment, Jerry. Give us your thoughts on that. What is it? What do they put into the clouds?
Cloud seeding began in 1947, was discovered by Dr. Bernard Vonnegut, little brother of famed novelist Kurt Vonnegut Jr. Dr. Vonnegut was quite an inventor and has a raft of patents to his name. He discovered he recognized that the probable cause of rain is nucleating particles. That is, you have an aerosol, something in the air, and that attracts a piece of ice to it, a water molecule to it, and then it attracts another water molecule, and then another, and then another, and eventually you have so many water molecules attached to this particle that they're now too heavy to remain in the air and fall out as rain or snow. He developed using silver iodine to do this, and it is still the standard of the industry 50-some years later. A number of other products have been tried, propane, dry ice, a number of things, and some have worked better than others, and some haven't worked at all, and silver iodide has proved to be quite effective.
They put it in there. Can it affect us, though? Does it hurt us if we breathe it?
That is a good question. There have been a number of scientific studies done on this, and there have been tort cases. I'm afraid I haven't studied that angle of it, so I know what I just said, and beyond that, I don't know the outcome. I don't know the actual answer to that question. Other than that, there have been people looking at this, and of course, whenever you have tort cases, you have you have two sides saying it harmed me. No, it didn't.
So there is a true science behind this, Jerry.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, he who controls the weather controls part of the planet, I think. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Particularly in the case of warfare, from the first battle on, you can see that how weather affects battles. That a classic example of this, of the first use of weather in warfare, was probably the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, when it was fought in January, when there were Europe was blanketed in fogs. The Allies had a fog removal system called FIDO, and they managed to, using their fog removal system, managed to get Allied planes aloft while the Germans were socked in, and that may have been the tipping point in the Battle of the Bulge.
That's interesting. How did this thing work?
You know, that I've read about it, but I've never been able to find anything that explained how it worked. Curiously enough, lots of stuff I've read has said that fog dispersal from airports is now one of the primary elements of weather management systems. That the Chinese and the Russians do it on a daily basis.
Not with huge.
How it works, I don't know. I'm not technical. I know the history of things and I know the politics of things, but how the things work, I leave to other people.
They don't have huge fans, do they? Pushing it and blowing it away?
Well, no. Usually it's a matter of you put something into the air. Again, like cloud seeding. Weather management these days mostly is fog dispersal, precipitation enhancement, and fog suppression. And precipitation enhancement and fog suppression are really exactly the same thing. And again, it's cloud seeding. Hail, if it falls during growing season, can destroy crops, can control billions. Every year, billions of dollars in crops are wiped out by hail. Now, hail suppression works on you go in and seed the clouds so that they rain before the hail forms. And again, the mainstream of science, like the AMS, the American Meteorological Society, are not willing to say how well it works because scientists like to quantify things. They like to be able to give you hard numbers on it. And it's really hard to say, well, how much would it have rained if we hadn't seeded it versus how much it did rain after the seeding? Did the seeding produce an effect or not? We can't really say because we can't say what it would have done if we hadn't done something.
Let's talk about various aspects of weather for what's left of this hour. We'll concentrate on HAARP next hour, Jerry, with you, because there is a tie-in, of course, as you know, with weather. Hurricanes. Can you push them? Can you steer them?
It would certainly seem so. The first attempt to steer a hurricane was Project Cirrus in 1949 using a cloud seeding technique. In this case, they were using dry ice rather than silver iodide. And this is a wild story. There was a hurricane safely off in the Atlantic, well out to sea, and scientists from General Electric and the Navy teamed up, flew out to this hurricane, and dropped about 200 pounds of dry ice into it. Now, that doesn't sound like very much. And indeed, the peer review group later said it wasn't enough to have done anything. But promptly after dropping this material into the hurricane, the hurricane abruptly changed direction and came onshore near Savannah, left 1,400 people homeless, and killed a couple of people. Now, the Navy's response was to classify everything. They slapped everything under a cloak of secrecy. And the GE's response was that the GE lawyers rounded up the scientists and told them to shut up and sit down. The head of the project was absolutely convinced that he had succeeded in steering a hurricane. It went the wrong way, but he was sure he had done it. Now, GE lawyers told him, you can never say that in public. And indeed, not once in his life did he ever manage to say that. But when the Navy finally declassified the paperwork a decade later, there it was in the paperwork that he was 99% convinced that it had worked. Now, when the Navy declassified it, they brought out this peer review group, and the peer review panel said, no, this is nonsense. This didn't do anything. These are not the robots you're looking for. Move along. And that set the tone. That's how many of these things have gone on, because the major corporations and the government are afraid of being sued. They're afraid of being seen in a bad light. They're afraid of getting bad press. And so there's been a whole lot of reluctance to take responsibility for doing any of this stuff. The next major project that the U.S. was working on was called Project Storm Fury.
And what time period was that?
Storm Fury ran for about 20 years, from the early 60s to the late 80s. And Storm Fury, realizing what had happened with Project Cirrus, only tackled hurricanes that were way away from the U.S. so that they could not possibly come on shore and do damage. And so over the 20-year period that Storm Fury worked, they only actually got to fiddle with about 8 hurricanes. And what they were doing is, again, they were doing cloud seeding, and they were cloud seeding there's the eye of the hurricane, and then there's the eye wall, which is the densest, the stormiest clouds right around, a storm right around the eye. And what they were trying to do is seed just outside the eye wall so as to force the eye wall to reform at a larger, at a greater distance. A figure skater doing spins, if she puts her arms down to her side, she spins a lot faster, and if she puts her arms up, she slows down. And so they were trying to use that in the hurricanes to slow the hurricanes down. They weren't trying to steer them; they were simply trying to reduce the strength. And in every hurricane that they did this to, they got reduction in the overall speed of the winds from 15 to 35%. They proved they could turn a Category 3 into a Category 1. But again, it was one of these things where it's hard to quantify. And in the era following the U.S. being signatory to the NMOD treaty, there was a whole lot of reluctance on the part of the federal government to engage in this openly, and the project eventually got canceled.
Eventually got canceled.
Yeah.
Now, in the categories they were able to reduce, of course, with the big push to get, to try to minimize the Category 5 hurricanes, get them down to a 2 level, I would guess.
Yeah.
And as you say, they were successful somewhat.
Now, there's another wrinkle on this, which is really amazing, which is the Russians. Again, as we said at the top of the hour, the Russians have the most aggressive. The Chinese tip their hats to the Russians, saying that they have the most advanced program on the planet. There was a bureaucracy within the Soviet Union that, when the Soviet Union broke up, spun off and became a private company. Today is called Elate Technologies, and Elate Technologies claims to be able to create hurricanes or cyclones or typhoons or monsoons, depending on where you are in the world, on demand. And you may remember in the late 1990s, there were forest fires burning out of control in Malaysia and Indonesia.
Yes, huge ones.
And Elate Technologies went to Malaysia and Indonesia and said, hey, we have the technology to create cyclones on demand. We could blow your forest fires out. And Malaysia went for it. Malaysia ponied up a never-admitted amount of money and hired the Russians to use their big wind technology to blow the forest fires out. Now, that flattened hundreds of villages and left thousands of people homeless, but I guess that's collateral damage. Now, the question is, have we seen that technology used since? And if you look at the tracks of the hurricanes in the 2005 hurricane season, they were rather unusual tracks. Most of the hurricanes went straight lines. Hurricanes don't normally do straight lines. They tend to do curves and meanders. And in 2005, the hurricanes looked like balls on a billiard table flying at us. I suspect, and it's not in the book, Weather Warfare, because the Weather Warfare is 400 pages of what I can prove. And I can't prove they were using the big wind technology to smack New Orleans, but it sure as heck looked like it. Now, another example of the possible use of the Russian big wind technology is Gulf War II. If you remember Gulf War I, it lasted, 56 hours?
Yeah, that was a quickie.
So going into Gulf War II, the Allies expected to be in Baghdad by Wednesday. And what happened? The moment they launched, up came a big wind that blew sand in the Allies' faces for 3 weeks. It was the strongest winds ever recorded, the worst sandstorm in 100 years. I suspect, and again, it's not in the book because I can't prove it, but I suspect Saddam Hussein went to his old friends, the Russians, and said, can you buy me some run-in time? And they said, how much money do you have?
How much money do you have? It's all about that, isn't it?
Right. And Elate Technologies are all over the map, literally and figuratively. You may know that there has been something of a rain war between Mexico and Texas. That Texas has been in a bit of a drought, and the Mexicans were in a tremendous drought. And then Elate Technologies came in. And Elate Technologies did something that the Department of Defense was playing with in the 1950s and abandoned, which was using ground-based stations to ionize and deionize the air. By ionizing the air, you turn whatever aerosols there are, dust particles, smoke, whatever, you turn them into nucleating particles. You turn them into virtual silver iodide. And whatever moisture there is in the air will attach to these impromptu nucleating particles. And Mexico went from devastating droughts where the northern Mexico reservoirs were at 20% or less, and today they're at 80% or more because of using this technique. And the rain not in the last 2 years, because the last 2 years there's been an excess of rain coming north, but prior to that, the rain was not making it past the Rio Grande, and the Texans were freaking out over this.
What are we going to do about like Lake Lanier in Atlanta?
That one you got me on. I'm not familiar with that one.
Well, I mean, they've got a dwindling water supply coming out of that lake. One of the reasons
determine the direction the Dow is going to go.
That's pretty astute on his part. Hey, Jerry, any surprises for you on Super Tuesday?
Well, I think, George, and great question. I think your introduction was exactly right. I think Hillary Clinton, especially if she carries California, is going to go a long way to getting a nomination. And Obama's made a tremendous challenge. It's very impressive how he's come from almost nowhere early on to challenge Hillary Clinton, of course, who was First Lady under Bill Clinton, and everybody knows. But I think if she wins both New York, New Jersey, and now California, Hillary Clinton's well along the way. I think the case is less likely to be settled tonight for John McCain. We see Romney picking up various states. Even Huckabee picked up some. And I've been on the radio today. The conservative talk radio is just a buzz in opposition to John McCain. I mean, Limbaugh was, railing against McCain for, supporting Ted Kennedy with the comprehensive immigration reform, the Kennedy Feingold reforms on campaign funding, McCain not supporting George W. Bush in the tax cuts, McCain possibly even being the vice presidential candidate for John Kerry in 2004. I mean, John McCain, if he does get the nomination, is not going to have the support of the conservative base of the Republican Party. But, George, I continue to think that this coming election, 2008, is the Democrats to lose. I wrote an article that 1.5 million manufacturing jobs have been lost under George W. Bush to globalism, outsourcing under George W. Bush. The 24 states voting today on Super Tuesday, 1 million of those jobs lost to China. The economic downturn we're headed into, I think, is going to be very difficult for the Republicans to overcome, no matter who their candidate is. And I think the disaffection in the United States right now with George Bush on any number of issues, spending, the Iraq War, you name it, I think this coming election is the Democrats to lose. They're capable of losing it. But right now, I think if John McCain is the nominee of the Republican Party, the Republican base is just basically going to sit it out. The conservatives do not support John McCain.
Say I see a third party. What do you think?
Well, your comments on that, George, as usual, right on. And, Ron Paul, I think, has raised $20 million and has not finished yet. And Mayor Bloomberg, who's independently wealthy, of course, who knows what he's going to do. I like to remind people, George, before we vote, we've got to go through an entire baseball season. That's 100 and how many games?
162 games.
And a world, playoffs and a World Series. We're not even into spring training yet. Between now and when we vote, a lot of things can happen. And this election can look very different than it does today. It's not over because this is Super Tuesday. Hillary may have an advantage. Obama's not done. And John McCain may be gaining. But the Republican Party, especially with the conservative base, is still in disarray.
I like your insight, Jerry. Thanks for the updates, and we're going to watch the stock market, my friend.
Always a great pleasure and honor to be with you. Thank you, George.
Jerry Corsi, his most recent book, The Late Great USA. Actor Barry Morse, who played a detective pursuing the wrongly accused Dr. Richard Kimball in the 1960s television series The Fugitive, has died. He was 89 years old. Born in London in 1918, Morris trained at London's Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts and appeared in British repertory and West End theaters before going to Canada in 1951. He loved the part he played of Lieutenant Philip Gerard on The Fugitive. The series ran for 120 episodes over 4 seasons. Restraining order against the man who's been at Britney Spears' side during her downward spiral alleges that he drugged her, took over her finances, and controlled the paparazzi like a general. From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie, and good Tuesday to you. This is Coast to Coast AM. Next hour, weather warfare with Jerry Smith. I'm telling you, the weather's all over. A number of tornadoes all over the South today. 15, at least. We'll talk about that with Jerry next hour. Super Tuesday. It was here. It is now gone. Hillary Clinton is still in a battle with Barack Obama. Though the momentum today seemed to go Clinton's way, it's still going to be a long fight for both of them. And John McCain, of course, slowly inching his way away from Mitt Romney, pulling away ever so slowly. This has got all the makings, in my opinion, of another third-party candidate popping in, and probably sooner than later. That's just my guess. Consumers should expect a deep recession triggered by the stealth method by the Federal Reserve to depress the market even when lowering interest rates in an effort to stimulate economic growth. This according to an economic analyst. Dr. Jerome Corsi's been following this incredible story on WorldNet Daily, where some are beginning to predict that the Fed will help push the Dow down from around 12,000 plus to 8,000. Jerry Corsi on the line with us. Jerry, tell me about this one.
Well, George, it's an interesting story from an analyst, Mike Bolser, who really follows the interventions. Looks at the economy as manipulated, where the Federal Reserve is manipulating the Dow downward. And the argument that Mike Bolser makes is that if you follow these repo agreements, repurchase agreements, and very few people know about them, but there's, over $150 billion out in repurchase agreements that the Federal Reserve gives to some 20 select banks to go into the market and make, bets on futures contracts, either up or down, the way the Fed wants it. And Bolser has...
Order was against Sam Lufty, was based on a lengthy declaration from Spears' mother, Lynn, who says that Spears met the 33-year-old in October of 2007, and essentially he moved into Britney's home and took control of her life. The power of prayer is all it takes to relax with a drink at a newly opened Croatian cafe. Customers at the Jedro coffee shop in Zagreb are asked to say a certain number of prayers in return for their drinks. The most expensive beverage is Coca-Cola, which costs 5 Hail Marys. A cappuccino costs 4 Our Fathers. NASA Space Shuttle Atlantis ready for a Thursday space shot. Atlantis slated to launch the 7-astronaut crew at 2:45 p.m. Eastern Time. A British firm claims to have designed a hypersonic passenger plane that could one day fly between Europe and Australia in less than 5 hours. Unfortunately, they say it'll take 25 years to perfect. Sci-Fi coming up with an incredible new series, UFO Hunters. We're going to talk with two of the principals of that new show in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. We cover incredible UFO stories here on this program, and now the Sci-Fi Television Network, they're about ready to embark on something fascinating as well. I want to introduce you to a couple of principals of a brand new television program called UFO Hunters. Sci-Fi has Ghost Hunters. Now we've got UFO Hunters. Oliver von Kaminsky is the founder of the New York Strange Phenomena Investigators up there in New York, of course, a scientific research group dedicated to the investigation of UFO sightings, UFO abduction reports, and extraordinary occurrences. Here's Oliver. Hey, Oliver, how are you?
Hello, George. How are you? An honor
Good.
to be here.
My pleasure. And Ted Davis, been interested in UFOs for as long as he can remember, and he is also a part of the Sci-Fi's new UFO Hunters. Ted has been a friend of Bud Hopkins and the Intruders Foundation for a number of years. In 2006, he and Oliver branched out, forming their...
Followed this and tracked it. And as the amount of the money let out in the repo agreements decreases, which it's doing right now, the stock market, the Dow Jones Industrial Averages, tracked down. And the statistical analysis here is very clear. So as the Federal Reserve behind the scenes manipulates how much money they allow these select 20 banks to reinvest on repurchase agreements, they lend out securities from the Fed, and they say they take them back in 20 days or a few days. And in the meantime, they instruct the banks to go out and buy futures contracts, either up or down, depending upon whether the Fed wants to depress or boost up the stock market. And I wrote the article today in WorldNet Daily, and today the stock market lost 370 points.
Yeah, it was a big drop.
Big drop. And the prediction that Bolster made is that this week, even though, last week we saw the Federal Reserve drop rates 125 basis points, 1.25%. Well, you think that would stimulate the markets. And what Bolster's saying is if you look at the manipulation that's going on in these huge quantities of repurchase agreements, the Fed is kind of like misdirection. They want everybody to think that they're stimulating the economy, but really the Fed is trying to induce a recession in order to, we'd have hyperinflation perhaps. Look at where the price of energy and food are. If the Fed weren't engineering the economy and the Dow downward, the concern is we'd be now in hyperinflation. So what Bolster, I think the genius of what he did was show the manipulation of the Federal Reserve, of the stock market, by these largely unseen and very technical repurchase agreements that's given out to a list of only 20 primary securities banks that are on the approved list. And most Americans, in fact, most professionals in Wall Street know nothing about this repurchase agreement market. But yet I think Bolster's right. It does determine